Richard Evans set his coffee mug down on the worn wooden dining table, the soft morning light filtering through the thin curtains of the small kitchen in their suburban Cleveland apartment. The room was quiet, save for the faint chirping of sparrows outside the window and the gentle clinking of a spoon against a cereal bowl wielded by Anna, his 12-year-old daughter. Anna sat across from him, her light brown curls spilling over her shoulders, her clear eyes sparkling like an autumn lake. She toyed with the spoon in her bowl, humming an old hymn her grandmother Helen used to sing. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." "You're singing that again?" Richard asked, his voice low and steady but tinged with the fatigue of a night shift at the mechanic's workshop. He wore a rumpled blue shirt, his hands still faintly scented with machine oil, and took a sip from the cold, bitter coffee in a chipped porcelain mug. "I like it, Dad," Anna replied, her eyes lighting up like twin emeralds in the morning sun. She paused her fiddling, resting her hands on the table and tilting her head to look at him. "Grandma said the Lord is always with us, even on the darkest days. She read it to me from the Bible, Psalm 23 verse 4. Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Don't you remember?" Richard nodded absently, his gaze drifting from Anna's radiant face to the corner of the kitchen, where a small framed photo hung crookedly on the wall. In it, his mother Helen smiled warmly, her frail arms wrapped around a 3-year-old Anna. Helen had been a devout woman, always carrying her weathered leather-bound Bible like a trusted companion. When she passed away from heart disease 3 years ago, she left that Bible to Richard, and it now sat silently on a shelf in the living room, gathering dust. Richard wasn't a man of faith. Raised in a Catholic household, he'd let that belief slip away long ago, sometime between leaving home for college and struggling to make ends meet as a mechanic. To him, life was a series of hard days, bills to pay, and the responsibility of raising Anna alone after his wife Laura walked out when Anna was 2. He kept the habit of a brief prayer before meals to please Anna, a small ritual Helen had passed down to her granddaughter. But in his heart, he believed fate rested in human hands, not some unseen power above. "Finish up, you've got school," he said, standing to grab his jacket from the back of a chair. He glanced at the wall clock, 7:15 a.m. Another ordinary Saturday began like any other. Anna nodded obediently, scooping up her cereal, occasionally looking up at him with eyes full of affection. Richard returned to the table, propping his chin on his hand as he watched her. He wondered what made Anna so fond of those hymns. Perhaps it was the memory of Helen, the woman who'd spent her final years telling Anna about Jesus, about love and salvation. To Richard, those tales were just comforting stories for children. But to Anna, they seemed an essential part of her world. That day, the sky was clear and blue, with white clouds drifting lazily over Cleveland. Richard planned to take Anna to the public library after school, where she'd borrow books about animals, her greatest passion. Then they'd grab pizza at Tony's, a weekend tradition she always looked forward to. He smiled at the thought of Anna chattering about penguins or polar bears, her bright voice washing away his exhaustion. But everything changed in an instant. "Dad!" Anna suddenly cried out, her voice faint and strained, snapping Richard from his reverie. He looked up to see her clutching her chest, her face pale as paper. Her eyes widened in panic. "It hurts," she gasped, then collapsed to the floor, the cereal bowl crashing down with her, shattering into jagged white fragments. Richard's heart stopped. He lunged forward, dropping to his knees beside her, cradling her small limp body in his arms. "Anna! Anna, what's wrong?" he shouted, his voice breaking with terror. He pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat falter, slow, then cease entirely. "No! No!" Richard roared, tears streaming down his face uncontrollably. He turned, yelling toward the door. "Susan! Call an ambulance! Hurry!" Susan, the elderly neighbor from the next apartment, rushed in, clutching her old phone. She gasped at the sight of Anna motionless on the floor, frantically dialing 911. "Ambulance! Please come quick. A little girl's passed out. 1423 Maple Street," she cried into the receiver, her voice trembling. Richard held Anna close, patting her cheeks, desperate to rouse her. "Anna, open your eyes. Don't scare me like this. Can you hear me?" But there was no response. Her eyes remained shut, her breathing so faint it was nearly gone. The ambulance arrived in 10 minutes, but to Richard, it felt like an eternity. The siren wailed outside, and 2 paramedics burst in, pushing him aside to load Anna onto a stretcher. They attached a heart monitor, administered drugs, their faces grim and silent. Richard followed them, climbing into the ambulance, sitting beside his daughter, gripping her cold little hand. "Don't leave me, Anna," he whispered, his voice choked with sobs. Through the ambulance window, he saw houses blur past in a daze, as if the world were slipping away, leaving him with nothing but fear. At St. Mary's Hospital, doctors rushed Anna into the emergency room. Richard was held back in the hallway, sitting on a cold plastic chair, his hands trembling as they clutched his head. He peered through the small window on the door, seeing Anna's form surrounded by machines and white-coated figures moving frantically. The beeping of monitors and the doctor's shouts filled the air, but he couldn't make out the words. His mind was blank, dominated only by the image of Anna collapsing, her eyes closed. In that moment of despair, a memory flooded back, vivid as if it had happened yesterday. He saw his mother sitting by his bedside, her frail hands holding the Bible, reading to him as a child. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Psalm 23 verse 4. Helen's voice had been gentle yet resolute, a promise beyond pain. Richard closed his eyes, his hands clasping together tightly. For the first time in years, he whispered a clumsy prayer. "Lord Jesus, if you're really there, be with my daughter like Mom said. Save Anna, I beg you." He didn't know who he was speaking to, but it was all he could do. A fragile thread of hope in a storm of desperation. Time crawled by, each second stretching into hours. Richard sat there, eyes fixed on the door, his heart heavy. He thought of the past mornings with Anna singing in the kitchen, her hugs after his long shifts, her smile the only light in his bleak life. "I can't lose her," he muttered, tears rolling down his cheeks. Finally, after over an hour, the door opened. The head doctor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes behind glasses, stepped out. He paused before Richard, his voice low and somber. "Mr. Evans, I'm Dr. Carter. Your daughter had sudden cardiac arrest, a rare arrhythmia. We used a defibrillator and revived her, but she's in critical condition. You should prepare yourself." Richard stood, legs shaking. "What do you mean? Will she be okay?" Dr. Carter sighed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll monitor her closely, but I have to be honest, it could happen again. Go see her." Richard nodded, but within him, a tiny spark of hope flickered, not from the doctor's words, but from the prayer he'd uttered in panic. He entered the room, seeing Anna on the bed, eyes still closed, breathing faintly through an oxygen mask. He knelt beside her, taking her small hand, whispering, "Thank you." He wasn't sure who he was thanking, the doctors, or a presence he'd never truly believed in. But in that moment, watching Anna's chest rise and fall, Richard felt something greater than himself, something he couldn't explain. Richard sat on the hard plastic chair in the intensive care unit of St. Mary's Hospital, his sunken eyes fixed on Anna. She lay on the bed, her eyes closed, her skin pale as wax under the harsh white lights. Wires and tubes snaked around her small frame, connecting her chest to machines that beeped rhythmically. The only sound breaking the oppressive silence of the sterile room. That steady beep, fragile yet persistent, was the thin thread tethering Richard to hope, keeping him from the abyss of despair. 3 days had passed since Anna collapsed in their tiny kitchen. 3 days of living in a waking nightmare, where every moment was a battle between hope and dread. Richard held her hand tightly, her small cold fingers limp in his rough, calloused palm, the hands of a mechanic now starkly contrasted with her frailty. He didn't dare let go, as if loosening his grip might let her slip away forever. Dr. Carter, the physician who'd saved Anna during her first cardiac arrest, had spoken to Richard the previous morning in a quiet corner of the hospital corridor. His voice was calm but heavy with the weight of experience. "Anna has a rare condition called Brugada syndrome," he explained, his eyes weary behind his glasses. "It's an arrhythmia that can stop her heart without warning. We've stabilized her for now, but I have to be frank. The risk of it happening again is very high." Richard listened, but the medical jargon floated past him like a cold breeze. He only asked one question. Will she live? Dr. Carter exhaled, a sigh carrying the burden of countless cases. We're suggesting surgery to implant a defibrillator. It could detect and correct abnormal rhythms. But I must be honest, the success rate is under 50%. If it fails, she might not make it. Richard shook his head instantly, his voice firm but trembling at the end. No, I won't risk it. I can't lose Anna. Dr. Carter nodded, not pressing further. I understand, but you need to watch her closely. Call us immediately if anything seems off. He stood, resting a hand on Richard's shoulder in a gesture of comfort, then walked away, leaving Richard with a growing fear gnawing at his chest. Now, sitting by Anna's bedside, Richard couldn't stop replaying that conversation. Surgery or no surgery, both were doors to an uncertain future. He didn't want Anna to suffer more, but he couldn't bear the thought of her not waking up one day. He just wanted her to open her eyes, smile at him like she used to, call him Dad in her clear, bright voice, and tell him about the birds she loved from her books. But there she lay motionless, a flower crushed by a storm. Richard bowed his head, his unkempt hair falling over his red-rimmed eyes. He whispered, Anna, you have to be strong. I need you. But there was no reply, only the machine's steady beeping and her faint breaths through the oxygen mask. On the third night in the hospital, Richard sat slumped in the chair, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He just dozed off for a few minutes, his head resting against the wall, when a piercing alarm shattered the silence. Anna's heart rate plummeted to 0. The monitor's flatline screamed in his ears. Richard jolted awake, his heart pounding. Anna! He shouted, lunging toward the bed. But before he could reach her, the door burst open, and nurses stormed in like a whirlwind. One shoved him back, her voice urgent. Get out now! We need space. Richard was dragged into the hallway, standing behind the small window on the door, watching as Anna was surrounded by white coats. A young nurse pressed hard on her chest, sweat beading on her forehead, while Dr. Carter barked orders. Defibrillator. Charge it now. A sharp zap cut through the air as electricity surged through Anna's body, but the flatline persisted. They began chest compressions, each push a desperate plea for life. Richard slammed his fist against the wall, the pain shooting through his hand unnoticed amidst the terror clawing at his heart. No, no, he muttered, tears streaming down his face. He felt powerless, as if the world were crumbling before him, and he could do nothing to save his daughter. Then a memory surged forth, vivid as a beacon in the darkness. He recalled his mother, Helen, sitting by him on nights he'd been scared as a child, nights when his father raged in drunken fits. She'd held his hand, reading from her old Bible. Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be open to you. Matthew 7 verse 7. Her voice had been gentle but firm, a promise that if he asked, someone would listen. Richard closed his eyes, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. He cried out in his mind, his voice breaking with anguish. Lord Jesus, I beg you, open the door of life for Anna. Don't take her from me. I can't live without her. He didn't know if he believed, but in that moment prayer was the last lifeline he could cling to. Meanwhile, on the other side of life's veil, Anna felt her body become weightless, like a feather drifting in the air. The pain was gone, the sounds of machines and shouts faded away. Before her a radiant light appeared, not blinding but warm and gentle, like her grandmother Helen's embrace. The light expanded, drawing her into a space of perfect peace, where fear dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Anna stepped forward, her bare feet touching an endless field of tiny white flowers swaying in a cool breeze. In the distance she saw a familiar figure, Helen, dressed in a simple white gown, her face glowing with kindness under the light. Grandma, Anna whispered, running toward her. Helen opened her arms, enveloping Anna in a hug, her voice soft and warm. My sweet Anna, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Anna looked up, feeling boundless love from that embrace. But then another voice spoke, deep and soothing like a spring breeze, not from Helen but from somewhere profound. Fear not, I am the living one. I hold the keys of death and life. Revelation 1 verse 18. Anna turned but saw no one, only the light enveloping her, a promise beyond words. She wasn't afraid. She felt peace, cradled by a love beyond comprehension. I want to stay here with Grandma, Anna said, gripping Helen's hand tighter. But then she heard her father's voice, faint and broken with tears. Anna, don't go. I need you. That call pierced the light, tugging her back like an invisible thread. Anna turned, looking at Helen one last time. Helen smiled, whispering, Go, my darling. Your father needs you more. The light dimmed, and Anna felt herself pulled back to her body, like a leaf returning to its branch. In the emergency room, Dr. Carter had just ordered a third shock when the monitor flickered. We've got a pulse, the young nurse cried, her voice trembling with disbelief. 40 beats per minute. 50. Richard, standing outside, heard the shout and burst in. He saw Anna's eyes flutter open, her clear gaze meeting his, her voice weak. Dad! Anna! You're awake! Richard choked out, dropping to his knees beside the bed, pulling her into his arms. Tears streamed down his face, soaking her gown. He didn't care about the doctors around him, their stunned stares irrelevant. All he saw was Anna alive, here with him. Dad! Anna murmured, her voice hoarse through the oxygen mask. I saw the light. Someone told me I didn't have to go yet. The voice, it was warm like Grandma's. I think it was Jesus, Dad. Richard froze. He stroked her hair, his hand shaking. Whatever you saw, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I'm just glad you're back. I don't know who it was, but thank you. Thank you for staying. Anna gave a faint smile, her eyes shining with innocent faith. He said I should stay with you, she whispered, then closed her eyes, drifting into a deep, exhausted sleep. Richard sat there, holding her hand, a question swelling in his heart. Was it a hallucination from her near-death state, or had something greater truly heard his prayer? He wasn't sure, but as he watched Anna breathe steadily, he felt an unfamiliar presence. Not from the machines or the doctor's hands, but from a place deeper, a place he'd never dared believe in before. He bowed his head, whispering, Thank you. The words were vague, undirected, but they were the most sincere thanks Richard had ever uttered in his life. A week had passed since Anna's second cardiac arrest, and St. Mary's Hospital had become a second home to Richard. He no longer counted the days, only knowing that each morning he awoke beside his daughter was a gift he couldn't take for granted. Anna lay on the white hospital bed, surrounded by fewer wires now, her condition showing signs of improvement. Her clear eyes stayed open longer, and though her voice remained weak, she could sit up, even asking Richard to tell her stories. Tales of his youth as a bicycle repairman, back when he dreamed of a different life before everything fell apart. Richard sat in the familiar plastic chair, his gaze never straying from Anna. It was a rainy day, droplets pattering against the window of the hospital room, streaking down the glass like tears from the gray Cleveland sky. He wore an old jacket, holding a book about birds he'd brought from the library for Anna. She'd paprasil him to read about emperor penguins, and Richard, despite his exhaustion, obliged to keep her spirits up. Dad, did you know? Anna said, her voice raspy but eager. Emperor penguins survive the coldest winters in Antarctica? They huddle together to stay warm, like how you hug me. Richard smiled, brushing her soft curls. Is that so? I'm not as good at handling the cold as they are, he teased, his tone gentle. Inside, a warmth spread through him as he saw Anna slowly returning to herself. The cheerful, curious girl he'd always known. The doctors were astonished by her recovery. Dr. Carter, during a checkup, had told Richard, I can't explain it. After the second arrest, we thought she'd need surgery right away, but her heart's stabilizing in an incredible way. This is a rare case. He paused, eyeing Richard curiously. Do you believe in miracles, Mr. Evans? Richard didn't answer immediately. He mumbled, I don't know. I just know Anna's still here. But the question lingered in his mind, a seed beginning to sprout. After the second incident, when Anna spoke of the light and a warm voice, Richard had started praying more. Not just before meals as a ritual, but every night when the fear of losing her crept in, whispering clumsy pleas he'd never imagined saying. Want to hear about the time I fixed a rusty bike? Richard asked, shifting the topic to lighten his heavy thoughts. Anna nodded, her eyes brightening. Tell me, Dad. I love your stories. Richard began, his deep voice filling the small room. He recounted a summer when he was 18, spending a week fixing an old bike for his cousin, only to discover it had no brakes as he careened down a hill. Anna giggled, her laugh clear and tinkling like wind chimes against the rain outside. Richard watched her, relief washing over him. Maybe he thought things would be okay. Maybe the miracle Dr. Carter mentioned was real. But that hope was short-lived. That afternoon, as Richard flipped through a local newspaper, a habit to pass the time, Anna coughed sharply. He looked up, seeing her face pale, her small hand clutching her chest. "Dad, I'm tired," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Before he could react, the heart monitor screeched, the alarm piercing the calm. Anna's heart rate dropped to 0. The screen showed a flat line once more. Richard leapt up, shouting, "Anna!" He reached for the bed, but the door flew open instantly. Nurses rushed in, pushing him back with urgent force. "Get out! We need to work!" one yelled, her tone frantic. Richard was hauled into the hallway, peering through the small window, watching as Anna was engulfed by white coats. Dr. Carter dashed in, defibrillator in hand. "Charge it! Now!" he commanded. A sharp zap echoed as electricity jolted Anna's body, but the line stayed flat. They began chest compressions, each press a desperate act, their faces growing grimmer by the second. Richard pounded the wall, his knuckles bleeding, the pain drowned by the agony tearing at his heart. "No, it can't be," he roared, tears streaming unchecked. Through the glass, he saw Anna's tiny form jolted by compressions, a lifeless doll in the doctor's hands. After 20 minutes, Dr. Carter emerged, peeling off his gloves, his eyes heavy with fatigue and sorrow. He stopped before Richard, his voice low. "Mr. Evans, we did everything we could. She didn't make it. Go say goodbye." Richard crumpled to the floor, hands clutching his head, a primal scream escaping him. "No, Anna can't leave me. You're lying." He stumbled into the room, shoving nurses aside, collapsing beside the bed. He seized Anna's hand, now cold and still, crying out in desperation. "Anna, wake up! You can't leave me. Do you hear me?" But Anna didn't respond. Her eyes remained shut, her face devoid of life. Richard pulled her into his arms, tears soaking her gown, hot and trembling. The world collapsed around him, leaving him in a void of darkness where light and hope had vanished. In that moment of utter despair, a memory flared, bright as a flame in the night. He saw his mother Helen telling him the story of Lazarus, a man dead, yet called back to life by Jesus. She'd read, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live." John 11 verse 25. Her voice had been unwavering, full of faith, as if it weren't just a tale but a living promise. Richard closed his eyes, clutching Anna, shouting in his mind, "Lord Jesus, you are the giver of life. I believe your words in John 11 verse 25. Make Anna live again. I beg you. I offer my life to you, just don't take her away." He sobbed, his voice breaking. "I'm not worthy, but have mercy on Anna. I believe." The nurses stood around, their eyes filled with pity and unease. One whispered to another, "Poor man. He can't accept it." But Richard didn't care. He kept praying, repeating his plea like a desperate hymn, each word a dagger in his heart, yet a final thread of hope holding Anna to him. Meanwhile, beyond the veil of life, Anna stood before a radiant gate of light, more beautiful than anything she could imagine. The light wasn't just warm. It was alive, pulsing with an unseen rhythm that enveloped her. A figure appeared, clad in a pure white robe, his face gentle yet radiating holy authority. His eyes met hers, brimming with love and understanding, as if he'd known her since before time began. "I am Jesus," he said, his voice resounding like a stream over smooth stones, tender yet powerful. "Do you wish to stay with me or return to your father?" Anna gazed at him, overwhelmed by a boundless love she couldn't fathom. Before her, a field of flowers stretched endlessly, and Helen stood there, smiling warmly. "Grandma," Anna whispered, stepping forward. Helen opened her arms but didn't embrace her, saying softly, "My dear, it's not your time." Then Anna heard her father's cries, his prayer echoing through the light. "Make Anna live again. I believe." That call halted her, her heart trembling with his love. She turned back to Jesus, tears streaming down her face. "I want to go back to Dad," she whispered, her voice shaky but resolute. Jesus smiled, a smile like the dawn breaking. He placed his hand on her shoulder, warmth spreading through her. I grant you life once more, he said, to bring my love to your father and the world. The light engulfed Anna, and she felt herself drawn back to her body, like a bird returning to its nest. In the hospital room, Dr. Carter had turned to sign the death certificate when the monitor jolted. "We've got a heartbeat," the young nurse shouted, her voice quaking with shock. 60 beats per minute. 70. The flatline surged into waves of life. Richard looked up, stunned. Anna's eyes opened, her clear gaze finding him, her voice faint. "Dad!" "Anna!" Richard cried, pulling her into his arms, tears soaking her shoulder. "You're alive. Thank you, Lord. Thank you." He wept uncontrollably, heedless of the doctor's astonished stares. All he saw was Anna, his daughter back from death, a miracle he'd never dared dream of. The days following Anna's third cardiac arrest unfolded slowly, as if time itself had paused to let Richard and his daughter breathe, live, and savor the precious moments they'd nearly lost forever. The hospital room at St. Mary's no longer felt like a cold cage of machines and fear. It Dujan transformed into a space of rebirth, not just for Anna, but for Richard himself. Anna lay on the bed, her small frame still fragile, but her clear eyes regained their sparkle. Her breathing steadied, though she relied on oxygen support in the initial days. The tangle of wires lessened over time, leaving faint red marks on her pale skin, scars of her battle with death. Richard sat by her side, holding her hand, his eyes never straying from her even for a moment. He feared that if he blinked, she might vanish again, like a dream dissolving in the harsh light of day. Dr. Carter, who'd witnessed all 3 of Anna's arrests, entered the room the morning after the miracle. He carried a clipboard, his eyes behind his glasses reflecting a mix of awe and confusion. "Mr. Evans," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I've been a doctor for over 25 years, but I've never seen anything like this. After that third time we thought it was over." Yet her heart restarted, and not only that, it's stabilizing miraculously. "I have no scientific explanation for it." Richard looked up, his red-rimmed eyes alight with newfound faith. "So what do you think it was?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Dr. Carter offered a rare, faint smile. "I don't know. Maybe a miracle, maybe her will to live, or something greater. What do you think?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Anna, saw her weak smile directed at him, and the answer crystallized within him. "I think it was God," he said, his voice firmer than ever. "I asked him, and he heard me." Dr. Carter nodded, not arguing. "Whatever it was, she'll need time to recover. We'll keep her here another month for observation. But I'll say this, it's one of the most memorable days of my career." He turned away, leaving Richard with a flood of thoughts rising in his heart. Anna, though frail, wanted to talk. She looked at her father, her voice scratchy but filled with feeling. "Dad, I met him. Jesus. He was really there, in the light. He told me, 'I am the resurrection and the life,' like in John 11 verse 25. He said I should live so you'd believe in him." Richard listened, his heart trembling with each word. He recalled his desperate prayer as Anna lay lifeless, how he'd cried out John 11 verse 25 as a final act of faith. "You really heard him?" he asked, his voice quivering. Anna nodded, her eyes glowing with innocent certainty. "He was so gentle, Dad. He asked if I wanted to stay with him, but I heard you crying. I didn't want you to be sad, so I chose to come back." Richard bowed his head, tears rolling down his cheeks. He gripped Anna's hand tighter, whispering, "Thank you, Anna. And thank you." He didn't specify who you was, but in his heart, the image of Jesus Anna described began to take shape. No longer a vague notion from his mother's Bible, but a living reality that had touched his life through his daughter. In the days that followed, Anna recovered slowly but surely. She started eating small meals, oatmeal Richard cooked at home and brought to the hospital, knowing she loved its gentle sweetness. She'd ask him to sing hymns despite his rough, off-key voice. "Sing Grandma's song, Dad," she'd say, and Richard, though sheepish, would croak out, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." His singing was far from perfect, but to Anna, it was the sweetest sound in the world. One evening, after Anna drifted into a deep sleep, Richard returned home to gather more clothes for her. Stepping into the quiet apartment, he felt an oppressive stillness. The broken cereal bowl from that fateful day still lay on the kitchen floor, its white shards a stark reminder. He knelt, picking up the pieces, his hands trembling. Then he stood, walking to the living room shelf where his mother's old leather Bible sat, coated in dust. He took it down, wiping the grime with his sleeve, feeling its weight in his hands. He opened it, flipping the pages slowly, searching for something he couldn't name. His eyes landed on Romans 10 verse 13. For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. The word struck him like a ray of light. He remembered the 3 times he'd called out. Awkwardly, desperately, but sincerely, and the 3 times Anna had returned from death's edge. Richard sank onto the sofa, the Bible in his lap, and for the first time in years, he prayed willingly, not out of fear or obligation. Lord Jesus, I don't know what else to say but thank you. I didn't believe before, but now I see you heard me. Thank you for keeping Anna with me. The prayer wasn't eloquent, but it was everything he had. An acknowledgement from a heart once closed to faith. A month later, Anna was discharged. Still weak, she used a wheelchair at first, but her smile returned, radiant as spring sunshine. Richard brought her home, and from then on their lives changed. They began attending St. Peter's Church every Sunday, a small congregation near their home where Helen once worshipped. Richard was baptized on a rainy day, standing before the congregation as water trickled down his forehead. I didn't used to believe, he said, his voice shaking but strong. I thought life was just work and worry, but Jesus showed me he's real through Anna. He saved her 3 times, and in doing so, he saved me. Anna sat in her wheelchair below, clapping, her eyes twinkling with joy. She became a vital part of the church community. Each night, father and daughter knelt by the window, gazing at the moonlight through the trees, praying together. Lord Jesus, thank you for your love and miracles. Help us bring that love to others. Anna's story didn't stay confined to their family. It spread through St. Mary's Hospital, from the nurses to patients who'd been there during her ordeal. A young nurse who performed CPR during the 3rd arrest told her colleagues, I've never seen anything like it. She was gone, then came back, right as her dad prayed. I didn't believe in miracles, but now I'm not sure. Dr. Carter, once skeptical, was drawn in too. One evening after a long shift, he sat alone in his office, opening a Bible a colleague had given him years ago but he'd never read. He turned to Acts 4 verse 12. There is salvation in no one else, and the word stirred him. He began his own faith journey, joining Richard and Anna at church one Sunday soon after. Anna, her health steadily improving, blossomed into a vibrant girl. She no longer seemed frail, though she still took medication and had regular checkups. She'd sit in the backyard, sketching scenes of the light she'd seen, fields of flowers, Helen, and a figure in white with a gentle smile. This is Jesus, she'd say to Richard, handing him a drawing. Richard gazed at it, his heart swelling. He hung it on the living room wall beside Helen's photo, a testament to their journey. Their lives were no longer just about survival but about carrying Jesus' love to others. A journey sparked by Anna's 3 brushes with death and her 3 returns, guided by a love greater than life itself. A year had passed since Anna's discharge from St. Mary's Hospital, and the lives of Richard and his little daughter now shimmered with a new hue. Their small apartment in suburban Cleveland was no longer just a shelter to endure the days. It had become a true home, where the light of faith and love seeped into every corner. On the living room wall hung Anna's drawing of Jesus, a field of flowers under radiant light, a white-robed figure smiling gently, beside the old photo of Helen, Richard's mother. Each glance at it filled Richard with an inexplicable peace, as if the wounds of his past had been healed by an unseen hand. Anna was now 13, her health far stronger, though she still required periodic checkups. She no longer needed a wheelchair, though her first steps post-recovery had relied on Richard's steady support. Now she could run and play in the backyard, where Richard had built a clumsy but sturdy wooden swing. Anna often sat there in the afternoons, a book about birds in hand, her clear eyes gazing up at sparrows flitting across the Cleveland sky. Richard stood on the porch, a mug of hot coffee in hand, watching her with a faint smile. He'd quit night shifts at the mechanic's workshop after Anna's ordeal, switching to days despite the pay cut, just to be near her more. Their life was simpler now, but to Richard, Every day with Anna was a treasure he'd never take for granted. It was a mild autumn day, golden leaves drifting lazily onto the lawn, forming a natural carpet beneath Anna's feet. She looked up, calling, "Dad, come play with me. Push the swing." Richard set his mug down, stepping into the yard. He stood behind Anna, giving the swing a gentle push, her bright laughter ringing out like a healing melody. "Higher, Dad!" she shouted, her small legs kicking in the air. Richard pushed harder, watching her soar, her curls dancing in the breeze. He thought back to the days she lay still on the hospital bed, to the moment he'd feared she was gone forever, and gratitude surged within him. "You're so strong now," he said, his voice warm. "I never thought I'd see you running around like this." Anna turned her head, beaming. "It's because Jesus gave me life again, Dad. He told me to stay with you, so I have to be strong so you won't worry." Richard paused, letting the swing slow. He knelt before her, meeting her gaze. "You still remember him, don't you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Anna nodded, her eyes alight with unwavering faith. "I'll never forget, Dad. He was so gentle but so strong. He put his hand on my shoulder, and I felt like everything was okay. I want you to meet him too, so you know how much he loves you." Richard bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. Anna's words, simple yet profound, pierced the shell he'd once built around his heart. He recalled the days he'd lived without faith, days he believed life was just an endless grind, where he bore every burden alone. But through Anna, he'd glimpsed a different truth. A love greater than he could fathom had pulled his daughter back from death not once, but 3 times. "You're right," he whispered, pulling Anna into a hug. "I've met him through you, and I'll never forget." That afternoon, Richard decided to take Anna to the cemetery on the outskirts of town, where Helen rested. He carried her old leather Bible, walking beside Anna through rows of moss-covered gravestones. Anna held his hand, her steps slow but steady, no longer frail. They stopped at Helen's grave, a modest stone inscribed, "Helen Evans, 1950 to 2022. The Lord is with her." Richard knelt, placing the Bible on the grass, his hand brushing the stone. "Mom," he said, his voice soft but no longer pained, "I get it now. You always said the Lord was there, even in the darkest times. I didn't believe you, but now I know you were right. He saved Anna, and through her, he saved me." Anna knelt beside him, laying a small bunch of wildflowers she'd picked along the way atop the grave. "Grandma," she said, her voice clear, "I saw you in the light. You told me to go back to Dad, and I did. Thank you for telling me about Jesus." Richard watched her, then looked up at the vast blue sky. He opened the Bible, turning to Psalm 23 verse 4, Helen's favorite verse. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." He read aloud, his voice echoing in the quiet cemetery, a final affirmation of their journey. "See, Anna," he said, turning to her, "this was Grandma's favorite. Now I understand why. Even when we walked through the darkest days, the Lord was there. He was with us every time your heart stopped." Anna nodded, her eyes shining. "He's still here, Dad. I feel him every day." Richard smiled, pulling her close. They sat there for a while, bathed in the soft golden light of the autumn afternoon, letting the words of Psalm 23 verse 4 resonate in their hearts like a song of life and hope. Their lives now were more than mere existence. They were a journey to share Jesus' love with those around them. Richard became an active member of St. Peter's Church, not just attending services but helping struggling families, as he'd once wished someone would help him in his darkest days. Anna, growing stronger, shared her story with the church's children's group. She drew more pictures of the light, of Jesus, gifting them to anyone needing a spark of hope. Their tale didn't stay within their small circle. It spread beyond, through the nurses' whispers at St. Mary's, through Dr. Carter, now a regular at church with them. One evening he visited Richard's home, bringing a bottle of homemade apple cider as a small gesture. "I never believed in miracles," he said, sitting on the sofa, gazing at Anna's drawing on the wall. "But after what I saw with her, I can't deny it. I read the Bible and this verse changed me. Acts 4 verse 12. There is salvation in no one else. I think I've found it." Richard nodded, smiling. "I was like you," he said. "But Anna showed me that sometimes, You have to lose everything to find what matters most. Anna entered holding a new drawing. This is for Dr. Carter, she said, handing it to him. It depicted a glowing field of flowers, a white-robed figure at its center. This is Jesus, she said. He's with you too. Dr. Carter took it, his eyes welling up. Thank you, Anna, he whispered, his voice thick. Each night as darkness fell over Cleveland, Richard and Anna knelt by the living room window, watching moonlight filter through the trees outside. They held hands, praying together. Lord Jesus, thank you for your love and miracles. Thank you for Psalm 23 verse 4. Though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we fear no evil, for you are with us. Help us live worthy of this gift and share your love with others. That prayer wasn't just gratitude. It was a commitment to live not merely to survive, but to spread the light they'd received. Anna, with her 3 miraculous revivals, was a living testament to that love. She didn't just survive. She lived to tell of a Savior who'd called her back from the shadows, not only for her father, but for all who'd listen. Richard looked at Anna, saw her smile in the moonlight, and knew their lives now held a purpose greater than he'd ever dreamed. The echoes of the miracle weren't just Anna's survival, but his own rebirth. A father once lost, now found through Jesus' love and his daughter's clear, unwavering eyes.